Okay, so now we continue to signaling mechanisms and drug action. So after the drug binds to its receptor, we need to know what happens next. No? So when a drug binds to its receptor, we now have signaling mechanisms that will eventually lead to the pharmacologic effects of the drug. No? So transmembrane signaling is the process in which messages are relayed from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell to trigger cellular response, which is the pharmacologic effect of the drug. No? So, of course, the key components here is the drug or the ligand, the receptor, the specific way by which the signal is transmitted. So, we call that the signal transduction pathway. Um, and whether the pathway we use second messengers, and then you have the eventual cellular response. No? So, in terms of transmembrane signaling, there are said to be five mechanisms which are represented in the diagram uh, in the screen. No? In the first signaling mechanism, you have a lipid soluble drug which can cross the plasma membrane and bind to intracellular receptors. And the intracellular receptors may actually be an enzyme or a regulator of a gene transcription. In the second mechanism, you have a ligand that binds to the extracellular domain or extracellular portion of a transmembrane protein. Um, and when a ligand binds to that extracellular portion, it triggers activity of an enzyme system at the other end of this transmembrane protein. The other end, which is in the cytoplasmic portion, will contain enzymes, usually kinases. No? Number three is quite similar. So you also have a ligand that will produce a signal when it binds to the extracellular domain of the transmembrane um, receptor, but this is bound to a separate protein, tyrosine kinase, which it activates. No, so in number three, it doesn't have its own set of enzymes, but it uses another source. No, so the enzymes that activate and phosphorylates protein later on will come from another source in the cytoplasm. This is the JAK pathway. No, the fourth one is pretty straightforward. You have the ligand that or drug that binds to the extracellular domain of the transmembrane potential, causing uh, a conformational change in the receptor, which leads to opening of ion channels, now allowing sodium to enter. And it's the increase in the intracellular sodium concentration that will initiate the cascade of intracellular events that um, lead to the pharmacologic effect of the drug. No? Number five, you have a signal that is produced when a ligand binds to a cell surface receptor, which is linked to uh, an effector enzyme by a G protein. No? So we will look into the specifics of these five mechanisms as we proceed. So for the first type of transmembrane signaling, this is when you have an intracellular receptor that binds like lipid soluble agents such as steroids, vitamin D, or thyroid hormones. No? So here, the receptors are located within the cell, and once the receptors are activated by the drug or the ligand that traverses across the cell membrane, once these drugs reach the specific receptors, then these receptors will cascade cellular events that lead to the pharmacologic effects of the drug, no? For example, here, it binds to specific, the receptors, when stimulated, uh, binds to specific DNA sequences near the genes whose expression is to be regulated. So on the right may be a clearer example or clearer explanation. No? So this is um, what happens when glucocorticoids are administered. No? Glucocorticoids are, as we know, is a type of steroid, are types of steroid hormones that can easily traverse the extracellular membrane, no? So when upon entry into the cytoplasm, it attaches to a specific protein, which is called the glucocorticoid receptor. Now, when you don't have glucocorticoids in the system, then the glucocorticoid receptors is uh, in an off mode, no, because it is held by another protein which acts as its safety lock. No? So this protein is the HSP90. When glucocorticoids reach the system, it knocks off your HSP90. So the safety lock comes off and the glucocorticoid receptors become activated. No? When they become activated, so they do so by changing their conformational shape, they are now able to go into the cell's nucleus and affect gene expression. So what are the therapeutic consequence of such a signaling mechanism? One, this is the reason why hormonal effects will take time, no? Because of this complicated series of cellular events. It takes time to create the results from altering gene expression. Therefore, so it takes about 30 minutes to several hours. And so this impacts also the therapeutic effect of the agent. For example, if you want to help control asthma or relieve the symptoms of asthma, you will not expect that giving glucocorticoids will give an immediate effect, no, because it takes time to create effects that would decrease the swelling of the airways. Now, which is the pharmacologic effects you're after if you're giving glucocorticoids to relieve asthma. So it does not give you an instant relief. You will have to rely on other drugs to give instant relief because hormones alone, the the effect in terms of relieving or controlling asthma will take time. Secondly, the effects will last even if the agent has concentration of the agent has gone down, no? Because the intracellular effects like enzymatic activation, etc., will remain active long after the decrease in concentration of the agent. No? So therefore, when you give agents like hormones, no, it the therapeutic effect and even the toxic effect will persist even after the serum concentration of these agents have gone down to zero. So the second system is the ligand-regulated transmembrane enzymes, no? And this includes the receptor tyrosine kinase. So the ligands for this will be insulin receptor molecules, you have epidermal growth factor, uh, it, eter, uh, atrial natriuretic peptide, platelet-derived growth factor, and tumor growth factor beta, no? So as you can see, these are polypeptides which in inactivated form will exist in monomers. They are transmembranous and they traverse the entire thickness of the membrane. They have an extracellular component or domain and a corresponding cytoplasmic end or area also. No? And upon activation, this monomer will bind to another monomer non-covalently to form the activated dimer version of the receptor, no? So this is what happens in the insulin receptor, for example, no? Now, here you will notice that activation uh, will occur. You have activated receptors which will catalyze the phosphorylation of tyrosine residues on different targeting signaling proteins. Therefore, the cascade of events is such that a single activated receptor complex can modulate or can produce effects over a large number of biochemical processes, as illustrated in the slide, no, or in the screen. So it increases glucose uptake by opening up glucose channels, no. It translocates GLUT4 transporters, which facilitates the glucose uptake. Plus, it leads to the creation of certain molecules that will um, help enhance protein synthesis, cell survival, and proliferation. No, so it means that just by activating one receptor complex intracellularly, you're able to produce uh, changes in uh, various areas, as I mentioned. Now, another application of the another clinical offshoot of understand this signaling mechanism is the discovery of um, abnormally active receptor tyrosine kinase activities in leukemic cells. No, uh, in certain cancers, no, in leukemic and even some tissue, soft tissue cancers. Now, certain cancers will grow because they are receiving many growth enhancing signals, no, from special proteins called receptor tyrosine kinases. So these malignant cells appear to have receptor tyrosine kinases which are overly active and therefore sending a lot of growth signals uh, to cause cancer cells to proliferate. So by discovering this, pharmaceutical corporations were able to develop inhibitors that will stop these signals. No? One is they develop monoclonal antibodies like trastuzumab, which will attach to the outside of the receptor on the cell surface and blocks the growth signal from the outside. And also they were able to develop small molecules like gefitinib to enter the cell and block the the part of the receptor that will send the growth signals from within. So you have two mechanisms, antibodies that block the signal from the outside, and then you have small drugs that stop the signal from inside. And this will effectively stop cancer cells from growing. No? Now, this particular signaling mechanism will also inhibit the phenomenon called receptor downregulation. No? So this can be produced by EGF or PGDF through their action on the receptor tyrosine kinases. So their effect is said to be limited by a process called downregulation. So as we mentioned earlier, downregulation will occur when either the receptors are removed from the cell surface by endocytosis. So that's one way that downregulation occurs. Um, and then these receptors, which are sequestered into the cell, they become internalized, no? They are subsequently degraded. Now, if the degradation is faster than the manufacture of new receptors, then you have fewer receptors that will now be present on the surface. So this leads to a reduce in cell responsiveness of the cell to ligands or drugs or signals. No? So this is what happens in the EGF. No? So um, this is what happens when the EGF receptor is internalized. So here, the internalization or the downregulation of the EGF receptor happens very fast, no, shortly after activation. So the internalized receptors will be broken down by the lysosomes, and therefore this helps control the strength and duration of the growth signals. No? So whenever this natural process becomes deranged, no, like there are mutations that impair this process, there would be uncontrolled excessive signaling for growth, and this can lead to proliferation of cancer cells. That's why uh, you have pharmaceuticals which have developed inhibitors to these signaling processes, no? Like the monoclonal antibodies like trastuzumab and internal drugs such as uh, gefitinib. So you will see here Herceptin. This is the brand name, one of the innovator brand of trastuzumab. No? So this is the one that stops the signal from the outside. Okay, then you have more recently produced small molecule drugs which will stop the signal from the inside. Okay. So the next is the cytokine receptors, which uses the JAK-STAT pathway. So they're quite similar to the receptor tyrosine kinase, no? But there's a slight difference, no? So the ligands that use these receptors or bind to these receptors are exemplified by growth hormone, interferon, and erythropoietin, no? They do also form or undergo dimerization after activation of the ligand, but here they do not have their own tyrosine kinase activity, but the enzyme activity comes from a different system, which is the Janus kinases. Now, that's why it's called the JAK-STAT pathway. So these are separate proteins that will bind non-covalently to the receptor upon its dimerization or activation. Okay. Now, the fourth signaling mechanism makes use of or is exemplified by ion channels. So, in fact, a lot of drugs in the market will have these ion channels are as their targets. No? Okay. So, here you will find that in ligand-gated ion channels, uh, drugs that bind to it can mimic natural antagonists, so they can activate the channel and causes it to open up. Or some of the drugs can actually block and inhibit the channels from opening, no? Then you have the naturally produced ligands such as acetylcholine, serotonin, GABA, and glutamate, which also utilize the signaling mechanisms. No, so these ligands are, if you recognize, these are synaptic neurotransmitters. No, so the nicotinic, the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors will be one of the best characterized uh, examples of the ion channels, no? And the diagrammatic representation of this receptor is shown in the picture on the screen, no? So this is a pentamer made up of four different polypeptide subunits, no? And when acetylcholine binds to the site, usually on the alpha subunit component, there's a conformational change that causes the a central aqueous channel to open and allow the sodium channels to penetrate from the extracellular fluid. So there's a change in the electrical charge. No, it causes depolarization of the cell. And if this event occurs in the neuromuscular junction cells, then this leads to muscle contraction. No, if it occurs on nerve cells, then you have neuronal signaling. Okay, then the next system utilizes G proteins and second messengers. No, so this is the second messenger signaling system via the G proteins. So there are also a lot of extracellular ligands that utilize this system or bind to these receptors. No, we have hormones or neurotransmitters. No, and upon binding, they increase second messengers inside the cell. No, exemplified by cyclic AMP, phosphoinositides, or calcium channels. No. So there are three main parts of the signaling system. You have a cell surface receptor, which is the one that to which the ligand binds to. You have the G protein. So when the ligand binds to the surface, no, or the binding site of the uh, receptor, uh, it activates a G protein inside the cell, no? And then you have the effector portion. The G protein activates an effector, which is usually an enzyme and or even an ion channel, no? And this changes or increases the levels of a second messenger, such as cyclic AMP. No? So this is an example of this type of signaling. You have the cyclic AMP pathway. You will notice that the effector enzyme that increases the manufacture of cyclic AMP from ATP is adenyl cyclase. No? So the G protein stimulate the activity of the adenyl cyclase. No? And results in the following events. No? So in the end, because of elevation of your second messenger, there is an activation of uh, protein kinase A, which in turn activates or regulates gene expression. Okay, so you have phosphorylation of enzymes and transcription factors, no, etc. So you can have effects like mediation of cell growth or promotion or enhancement of cellular differentiation. So, examples of ligands that bind to this or utilize this system will be your um, though drugs that bind to your beta adrenoceptors. So you have your beta agonist or your beta antagonist, no, or blockers. You have glucagon, no, which binds the glucagon receptors. You have thyrotropin receptors, no, which bind to the thyrotropin hormones. And then you have dopamine and serotonin receptors, which bind to these neurotransmitters, no? Okay. So these are some of the G proteins, the receptors and effectors. Now, this is also included in our textbook. Okay. So So this is the configuration of your G protein coupled receptors. No, these are the receptors that produce a signal through activation of your G proteins. They're actually the largest receptor family, and they're also called the serpentine or seven transmembrane uh, receptors because of a snake-like polypeptide chain which assumes seven loops at the end of which will be attached uh, your G protein complex. No? So serpentine because they're like a snake, no? And there are seven loops at the end of which you find the G proteins. No? That's why it's called the G protein coupled receptors. Now, G protein coupled receptors can be regulated uh, through several means, no? So, G protein mediated responses to their ligands will often decrease with time, no? Even if the ligand or the stimulus is still present. So, this decrease is said to be desensitization. Now, when the ligand or drug is reduced, no, or removed from the system, uh, desensitization dissipates. So you have a recovery, no, a recovery of the receptors, and therefore reintroduction of the original ligand will again cause the response to resume. No, so this is the resensitization that occurs with reintroduction of the drug or ligand. Now, sometimes the desensitization will last longer. So the tissues become less responsive for prolonged periods. No? Okay. So let's look at this in detail. No? So after short-term exposure, the GPCR or the G protein coupled receptors undergo desensitization. For example, you have a beta adrenoceptor agonist, no? It activates the receptor, and therefore you have an increase, as we mentioned, of the production of cyclic AMP, no? But in a matter of minutes, this response will dissipate, no? Even if the agonist is still there. So this is what we call desensitization. Now, when you remove the agent for a short period, the agonist, the receptors recover. So they regain their full function. And when you reintroduce the agonist again, then these receptors will resume responding. So this is called resensitization. Now, with prolonged exposure, what can happen will be downregulation, no? So if, for example, you're utilizing the beta agonist for a long time, or you have repeated long exposures to it, resensitization fails or it does not occur. And so what happens is uh, instead you have a downregulation. You have a reduction of the synthesis of your beta receptors, or a sequestration internally from the cell membrane. This sinks down into the cytoplasm. So you have a long-term reduction in uh, responsiveness. Okay? So what are the key points in desensitization of your G protein coupled receptors, no? So activation and phosphorylation. So this is what happens when beta or an agonist attaches to the beta receptor, which is a type of GPCR, no? So you have activation of your G proteins. So you start the signal, you have an increase in cyclic AMP and so on. But at the same time, uh, you also activate G protein coupled receptor kinases, no? And this second substance, no, the G protein coupled receptor kinases, will cause phosphorylation of the receptor. And when the receptor is phosphorylated, it reduces its ability to activate G proteins. And so you have a diminution of signal propagation, and you have a reduction in the cellular response. No? Now, when the receptor is phosphorylated, no, so the GRK will cause phosphorylation of the receptor, it will attract a protein which you call your beta arrestin. No? And beta arrestin will bind to the G protein. No? So the G protein uh, will not be activated. Okay, so signaling is stopped. No? At the same time, when there is beta arrestin, it promotes the sinking of the GPCR into the cytoplasm, a process which we call internalization. So the receptor undergoes endocytosis, so it is sequestered or hidden away from the extracellular ligand. Okay, so you have a diminution of cellular response. So after the receptors internalize, then two things can happen, no? Um, it can be recycled, so the beta arrestin releases it, no? So you have a removal of the phosphate from the receptor, and the receptor goes back outside, no? So it goes up into the uh, to jut out and be exposed again in the extracellular portion of the cell membrane. So this is what we call resensitization. Or it can be degraded, no, by lysozymes and broken down. So this is the process of down regulation. So these are the types of second messenger, the source and triggers. What are the key enzymes and proteins that they trigger? No? And what are the main actions and examples of hormones or drugs that utilize this? No? Okay, so uh, let's look at the role of phosphorylation in second messenger signaling. No? So I mentioned this word in the first part of the lecture, and this is what we call signal amplification. No? Now, signal amplification occurs when one signal or one activation of a uh, lone receptor complex can activate many molecules uh, by adding phosphate groups to these molecules and thereby enhance the strength of the signal and the duration of the signal. So it's said to be amplified, no? So by triggering one receptor complex, uh, releasing one signal, many molecules are activated because that single signal can produce a lot of phosphate groups to activate these many molecules. And this translates to a longer and stronger signal. So the analogy is like turning on many lights with only one switch. No? Then another impact of phosphorylation in second messenger signaling is what we call flexible regulation. So different cells with different have different proteins, no? But here, one signal can cause different effects depending on uh, the enzymes or targets that are present and responsive to it, no? So one signal can produce different effects, can activate different systems, no, different enzymes or targets that are present. So think about it as one message being understood differently by different people. So you have just one signal activating several processes all at the same time. Um, in the system. No? So this is a picture of signal amplification. So again, it's usually manifested. One common system that produces this will be your G protein coupled receptors, exemplified by your beta receptors. No? Okay. Now let's go to the concept of drug selectivity and drug development. In drug selectivity, this refers to the ability of a drug to affect its target, no, specifically, without exerting any other effect in other structures of the body. So you sort of streamline the effect of the drug only to what is it intended for. So drug selectivity makes for a safer uh, profile of the drug, no? So because it targets only a specific effect, you minimize the side effects that you don't want, no? For example, this is especially useful in cancer treatment, no? With the production of monoclonal therapy, there's a drug which we call imatinib, no? They have discovered, researchers have discovered that leukemic cells have an abnormal protein which is absent in normal cells. And this abnormal protein is labeled as BCR-ABL, no? And so this became a target for drug development. They were able to develop imatinib as a monoclonal antibody that will target this particular abnormal protein, causing this to, so it attaches to these cells bearing this abnormal protein and initiates the demise or the destruction of the cell. No? So that's a very highly selective treatment in contrast to traditional chemotherapy, which targets also healthy cells. No? That's why, for example, if you give uh, conventional chemotherapy, it targets rapidly dividing cells, which is characteristic of cancer cells, but is also characteristic of bone marrow cells. No, and that's why one common side effects from conventional agents will be bone marrow depression. No? But with targeted therapy such as this, no, you minimize effects in other tissues. No, so it sort of just centers on the pathologic cells. So right now, these are the trends in drug development. No, so now we go beyond receptors. So in modern drug development, uh, the receptors are not the only target for drug action, no? So now we aim at intracellular molecules like signaling proteins or enzymes, and we develop agents that can modify the action of these and thereby cause beneficial effects for patients, no? Then we also target mutant proteins, no? So identification of these abnormal proteins, like I mentioned a while ago, that are found only in cancer cells, no? So we can develop drugs that only target these abnormal proteins. Then we can also develop drugs that can stop specific signaling pathways, no? Specific portions of a signaling pathway without affecting the whole system. No? And the key for all of these identification of specific drug targets is to minimize the side effects. No? So we call selective targeting as the aim because selective targeting will reduce unwanted effects on other tissues or healthy and diseased tissues. Okay? So we will end part two of my video recording here, and we will begin with the third part with the dose response in patients.